All right, so for this course, you're going to write a total of 3 argument constructions, and the first one's coming up this week. So what I want to do in this video is go over that assignment, how to access it, what it asks you to do, what the common mistakes are that you'll want to avoid, how you're going to be graded, and all of that good stuff so that you feel good and ready to tackle this. So first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to click on the assignments button. And if you scroll down to upcoming assignments, you'll see argument construction number 1 right there, and you click that, and you'll see a couple of things here that are important, okay? One is the assignment itself is linked right here, okay? So that'll bring up a Microsoft Word file for you so that you could actually complete this assignment on your computer and submit it through Canvas that way. If that doesn't work for you, though, there's a paper copy available to you in your course packet for this course. It's all the way at the back after some of the Chapter 6 handouts, so you could go and take that paper copy out and you could handwrite your argument construction and then upload photos of what you've handwritten, if that works better. Either way is up to you. This page right here is an important one that I'm going to come back to because it has actually the scoring rubric on it, how you get points for each of the problems that you have to address on this argument construction. So let's look at the assignment itself. All right, so it's important for you to remember that for all of these problems, you're assuming the Aristotelian standpoint, which means you're going to use the traditional square of opposition. So Boolean and the modern square of opposition are not relevant to this assignment. If you choose to handwrite your work, just make sure it's really easy for me to read your writing, right? Because not only am I reading handwriting, which nobody seems to be particularly good at these days, but I'm also reading it on a computer. So make it really easy for me to see the good work that you're doing, all right? So the biggest mistake that people make on this is they don't read the questions carefully, and so they don't provide the correct answers, okay? So, for example, number 1 says you want to translate. It says, what is the standard form ordinary translation? This means you use real words like the ones you're reading here, not symbols, of the following statement. There's no such thing as a logic student who's not a rascal. And sometimes I'll just get a symbolic statement for that. And it's like it said, don't use symbols. Make sure you use ordinary language. Here's another common mistake that people make. Assume the standard form statement you created for number 1 above is false. False. And then use the rules of conversion, obversion, contraposition, contrary, subalternation, or contradiction to create 2 other standard form statements that are necessarily false. And you may need to use more than 1 rule to create a false statement. Okay? So again, folks will forget that they're assuming that first statement is a false statement. Number 3, identify the rules that prove the statements you created are false. So you just say something like, oh, I used contraposition, or I used contradiction and subalternation, or something, some combination of those rules. Number 4 says, use that first statement that you translated and assume it's false, and then use your knowledge of the rules to create statements that would be necessarily true, okay? And then again, identify the rules. And then here's number 6, create a labeled Venn diagram that shows the standard form statement you created for number 1 to be false. Okay, so you got to create a Venn diagram that shows that statement to be false, not true. So how do you do that? And maybe thinking about the rule of contradiction will help you figure out there what that Venn diagram should look like. You want to label your circles, as I'm going to show you here in a minute. You get points for all of this stuff, for just putting the letters on your circles that show what the categories are that they represent. Now, number 7, explain how the Venn diagram shows the standard form statement you created for number 1 is false. Okay, so think here about how would I explain to somebody who's looking at my Venn diagram that I think shows that original statement to be false. How would I explain that to them so that they could see it? So they're sitting there looking at this thing and saying, I don't get it. How does that show that statement to be false? And you'd say, well, look, here's what you see in the Venn diagram. You see shading, or you see X's, or whatever. But you're going to sort of try to walk them through that Venn diagram. And once you've done that, you're all done with the first problem. And there's not many problems on this. Problem number 2, answer one of the following questions with a true standard form categorical proposition. what kind of college student is always successful, what kind of college student is never successful. Okay, so you're going to come up with a statement that says like, oh, all students who do a bunch of meth before getting on Canvas are never successful college students, or whatever. So you want to come up with a standard form categorical proposition that you think provides a true answer to one of these two questions. And then you're just going to kind of do similar things that you're doing with the previous problem. Okay, create another statement using your rules that would also have to be true, or create another statement that would have to be false. Or, as number 4 asks you to do, assuming that statement that you came up with in response to that question is true, what would be a couple of logically undetermined statements? And remember how you do that. You use the rules incorrectly, and then you're going to generate new statements with truth values that are undetermined. Okay, and then you're going to explain, why are those statements undetermined? How do you know? What rules did you break? And why do you think you can't use the rules in that way? And then you're going to have a couple of problems like number 6 here that you see, where it says, in order. If you obvert, then subalternate, then convert, then contrapose the standard form statement you created for number 1, what statement would result? Okay. Now again, a common mistake that people make here is they take that original statement and they obvert it, and then they take that same statement and then they subalternate it, and then they take that same statement and then they convert it. They ignored the in order part. So you obvert that first statement, then you're going to get a new statement as a result of that obversion. Take that new statement and subalternate it, and take that statement that you got from subalternation and convert it. Okay. And number 7 is going to ask ultimately, what's the truth value of that statement that you ultimately created at the end of all of those processes? Is it true? Is it false? Is it undetermined? Remember, once you lose the truth value because you use a rule incorrectly, you never get the truth value back, right? So once you lose track because you've used a rule incorrectly, once you lose track of the truth value, it's never recovered, and the truth value for every statement at that point forward is undetermined. All right, number 8 is asking to create a labeled Venn diagram. Remember the labels. Okay, explain how that Venn diagram shows your statement to be true. Now, number 10 is a bit of a different kind of problem, but there's a number of cases, there's some other problems like this coming up. Using the statement you created for number 1 above, the statement about which kinds of college students are always successful or never successful, apply the rule of conversion, obversion, contraposition, contraries, and so forth to create a valid, standard form, categorical, immediate inference. What should result should be something like all A or B, therefore some A or B, or something like that, okay? So you're going to use your knowledge of those rules to apply to your answer to the question that generates another statement that has a truth value you will know. And you put that together into an argument. And you say, because this premise statement, because of this premise statement that I came up with that answers this question is true, therefore, here's another statement by using one or more of these rules that would also have to be true. And there's therefore a valid immediate inference, okay? Now, number 11 and 12, again, there's a couple of these on the problems coming up. This is where people forfeit a tremendous number of points, okay? And this has to do with explaining why you think your premises are true, okay? Or in this case, just your single premise, okay? And so there's 2 ways people make mistakes. One is, number 11 asks you, justify the soundness of the immediate inference you created by explaining why you think the premise is true. A really common mistake people make here is they explain why they think the argument's valid. That's not what you're being asked to do here. You're being asked to explain why the argument is sound. And you will do that by saying, I know my argument is valid, plus I know that premise is true, and here's why. And this is where you want to think back to some of the practicing we've been doing with things like, is Seth Rogen an actor? How do you know? And if you say something like, as I said to you, then if you say something like, well, I've seen him in movies, that is really not good support for the truth of your claim, okay? We want to know things like, what is the evidence you would bring forward to show us that your claim that Seth Rogen is an actor is a true statement? So show us what you find on IMDb. List some of the movies that he's won awards for. Pile on that evidence. You want to make the best case you can that the premise of your immediate inference is a true statement. Bring it on. It's your opportunity to make a case and you only get one shot at it. So make a really good case. Similarly, for number 12, we don't want to know why somebody would, what the question asks you is this, is what reason would someone offer for rejecting the premise of your immediate inference? In other words, what might cause them to believe your premise is false? Okay, now this isn't asking you to explain why somebody might think your argument's invalid. It's why would they reject your claim that your premise is true? So if I said something to you like, hey, I think that all people identical to Seth Rogen are good actors, okay? And you say, well, why do you think that's true? I would say like, oh, well, here's how I define good actor. And I'd have to lay out for you what my criteria for defining a good actor are. And then I'd have to justify why I think those are the criteria. And then I'd have to show why I think Seth Rogen does meet those criteria. Now, somebody could reject my statement that Seth Rogen is a good actor. And what I would be doing in number 12 is explaining, well, I think somebody would reject this if they thought that the criteria for determining a good actor wasn't the criteria I offered, but was this criteria. Or they may say that he doesn't actually meet the criteria I've identified as well as I claim he does. Okay, so for this one, you're going to want to explain, this is how I think somebody who disagrees with me, this is what I think they're going to say. Okay, problem number 3 asks you to answer another question. What kind of animal is a good indoor pet? And then again, you're going through and you're working with that statement that you come up with to create an immediate inference, an argument with one premise. So you'll say something like, I think that all goldfish are good pets. And then for number 2, it says, we'll use that statement you just created and create an immediate inference out of that. And be sure the premise and conclusion are in ordinary language, words like the ones I'm using now. Okay, so then you're going to have a premise and a conclusion. And then you can symbolize the argument for number 3 by saying, hey, G stands for goldfish, or we'll say F stands for goldfish, and G stands for good pets. And so now I'm going to symbolize out this argument for you. And a really common mistake that people make here is they either don't identify the category of thing that they're representing with an individual letter, or they fail to symbolize out the argument, okay? So you want to make sure you do both of those things here. And then you're identifying what your propositions are. They're A, they're E, they're I. You're doing your Venn diagram. And again, number 7 and 8, what's the reasons that you have for believing that the premise of your argument is a true statement? You don't have to worry about justifying the conclusion for any of these. You're only justifying the premise because remember, you have a valid argument you've created, which means that if your premise is true, your conclusion will also have to be true. So the question that you have to answer is, why do you think your premise is true? Don't touch the conclusion, just justify the premise by explaining the reasons that you think it's a true statement, okay? And then again, 8, what's somebody gonna say in opposition to your premise? What would be the reasons for rejecting it? And then finally, your last problem, there's only 4 problems. Create a sound, ordinary language, standard form, immediate inference that addresses one of the following topics. So you create the argument here. You're going to have an argument with one premise and a conclusion, and then you're just going to kind of roll through these steps that are really similar to the previous steps, justifying your premise statement and so on and so forth. And that's it, okay? Now, I want you to come back, though, to this. This is super important. One is, this is due on October 4th, okay? So that's Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. The whole thing is worth 100 points, okay? But you're going to submit it to me. And so you're going to submit it to me, and I'm going to show you how you get points. So look at this, submission status. You get 5 points just for turning it in by the due date. You get 2.5 points if you can get it in within 7 days of the due date. And you can turn it in even after that. You could turn it in all the way at the end of the semester, although I do not recommend that you do that. But the only thing you forfeit, though, by turning it in beyond a week of its due date is you just don't get those initial 5 points, okay? But you still have the potential for 95 points. So you want to do this assignment, and if you can do it by the due date, that's ideal, okay? Now look how you're going to get this score guide back to you, and it's going to show you exactly how many points you got for each problem. Okay, so problem number 1, question 1. Either the statement was translated correctly or it wasn't, and you're going to get a point if you translated it correctly. For question number 2 for the first argument, it asks you to create 2 false standard form propositions out of that first statement that you created. And if you did that, you get 2. If you were only able to create one false statement, you get a point. And if you didn't create any, you don't get any points. And you'll see as you walk through this thing that each question for each problem has a specific number of points associated with you doing something with it. Like your Venn diagrams. Look at this one that I'm pointing at right on the screen. If your Venn diagram is correctly labeled, you get 2 points. I've seen people throw away like 30 points on this assignment from not labeling their Venn diagrams correctly, right? Like that's so stupid. Like do the easy things. They're super easy. So maybe something that would be a good idea for you to do is as you're working on your argument construction, kind of pieces at a time, maybe have this screen open here and clarify for yourself. This is what I'm being asked to do. I'm working on problem number 1, question 2. And this is what I'm being asked to do. So am I doing that? Okay. So you want to keep track of this so that you know that when you turn it in, you have done the best job you can at filling in this assignment correctly. So again, you can handwrite this, you can type it, doesn't matter to me. Ultimately, you've got to either send a file or a photo through Canvas to me. Okay. Now, as you're working on this, if you get just absolutely stumped on a question, email me. Right? Because the idea is, well, we can get your head wrapped around whatever concepts you need to understand to take care of what it is that you're stumped on, and then you can go do it on your own. Okay? So I'm not going to give you the answers, but I'm certainly going to step up and help you in whatever way I can. So you can't sit and suffer in silence. You just send me an email that says, I'm really stumped on this part of the problem. I don't know what it's asking me to do. All right? So that's your first argument construction. They all kind of look like this. So the most important things are follow those instructions. Be obsessive about that. You'd be amazed at how often people give up points just by working too quickly and not looking carefully at what it is that they're being asked to do. Make sure I can read your good work. Don't lose points because I can't understand what you're saying. Make sure you explain why you think the premises of your inferences, of your arguments are true statements. You can't do too much for that, but it's certainly easy to do too little.